If the thought of making a biryani sends you running for the hills, then this video is for you. Keep watching. Lamb biryani can be a little bit daunting to make, especially since there are so many different recipes out there and so many different styles to choose from. But I'm hoping that with my recipe and my different stages of cooking, you'll find it a little bit more achievable and a little bit easier. Whenever I cook dishes with lamb, I always tend to pre-cook the lamb first. I find that the flavours are much nicer that way and it's much easier to handle. So we're going to start by adding 1 onion that's just been coarsely chopped into a pan. So in they go, along with a tablespoon of ginger and garlic paste. You can use fresh if you want to. I just like to use the ground pre-prepared batch that I've got in my fridge. It just makes life a bit easier. And then because I'm actually cooking for 12 people today, I'm using 1.5 kilos of lamb. That goes straight into this pan too. We're making a big batch today. And then also tomato. Now I'm using passata. You can use fresh tomato if you want to use fresh, that's absolutely fine. If you do want to use fresh tomato, then you need about 2 tomatoes in here. Blend them up and just pour them in. But because I'm using passata, you want about 3 tablespoons. Then we're going to pop the heat on. Add a little bit of water now. I would say about 600 millilitres. Then we're going to let that come to the boil. Reduce the heat and let it simmer for about 25 to 30 minutes. Just give this a quick mix in and make sure all the onions are distributed. I'm using lamb shoulder on the bone. I feel like lamb shoulder or any meat on the bone is actually better in a biryani. I feel it gives a lot more flavour. But if you want to, you can use boneless. It's entirely up to you. Now that that's come to a really good boil, we're just going to put the lid on. And we're going to set this on a low heat to cook away for about 25 minutes or until it's almost cooked. While the lamb's cooking away, we are going to prep the masala. We're going to start with olive oil. You can use any kind of oil that you want, but I feel like oil is important in a biryani. And you do need quite a lot. It will just help the rice grains to stay separate when they go into the biryani. And then into the oil we are going to add onions. Now even though we've already put an onion in with the lamb to cook, because we're making a biryani we need a lot of masala. So in addition to the one that we already have, we're adding in another 7 into the masala. And I know that sounds like a lot, but it will break down and make the dreamiest sauce you can imagine. Now after all that eye-watering chopping, the onions can go into your pan. And we're also going to add in the whole spices now too. So into this we are going to add 4 types of whole spices. We're going to use bay leaves, about 4 or 5. And black cardamom pods. These give a really nice earthy flavour and they're quite smoky too. So 3 of those, and then a couple of cinnamon sticks or 3 small pieces, and then finally a pinch of cloves, about, I would say about 10, and then give that a quick mix in. And as soon as those spices hit that oil, you can smell them. And in our house, that's the signature smell of a rice dish being cooked. Then once you've mixed in all of the onions and the spices together, and they're coated in all of that oil, I'm going to leave this to cook low and slow so that all of those onions can really caramelise and break down so that they then blend into the sauce later. So just pop the lid on and leave it on a low heat and make yourself a cup of tea. Just make sure that every now and then you come back and give it a little stir. You want to make sure that the onions are evenly browned, and you can see that they do tend to stick a little bit to the bottom, so just make sure that you're giving it a quick stir every now and then. And they'll all go nice golden. And then once your onions are looking nice and golden like this, you are ready to add ginger and garlic. Now I know I've already added some into the lamb that we're already cooking, but this, because there's so much masala, we'll need more. Mix this in. And then once the ginger and garlic is also golden, which will only take a few seconds really, you can stir in the rest of the passata. Or if you're using fresh tomatoes, you'll need about 8 large tomatoes that have been blended. Now I'm using a full carton of tomato passata. It's got a really deep colour, a really rich flavour, and I think it works perfectly in biryani. Then mix this in. And now I know this looks really scary. There is a lot of tomato and there's a lot of onions here, but it is going to come together, I promise. All of that tanginess from the tomato passata will be balanced out by the onions that we've added, because we've really caramelised those, so they'll offer a little bit of sweetness in here. And then once the tomatoes have had a little bit of time to cook, you are ready for your spices. You can stir those all in. I'm going to let these cook gently for a good minute or even 2. And then as soon as you start to see the oil come away from the masala, you know that the masala has had plenty of time to cook. And you are ready to add your yoghurt. The yoghurt will actually give it a really nice tangy flavour. And if you find that your yoghurt splits when you add it into your salan or into your curry or your biryani or whatever, just make sure that you stir it right in straight away. Don't let it sit in the pan, and always make sure you use full fat yoghurt. And now you can see that the masala has come together nicely and the onions have broken down too. And so now the masala is all prepped and ready, your lamb should also be done too. So just make sure that the lamb is not quite falling off the bone cooked. It just needs to have a little bit of firmness to it, because we're going to cook it a little bit more in this masala now. So mine is actually done. So all I'm going to do is transfer this into the masala. Now this recipe isn't actually in my book. I shared the chicken biryani, which tends to be a much easier recipe and a much preferred recipe to make for a biryani. But if you're feeling adventurous, then a lamb biryani is always pretty spectacular. Now I'm just going to mix this in. And we're going to let this cook now until all of the extra water that I just poured in from the lamb has cooked away. And while that happens, we can boil our rice. What I am going to do is transfer this back into the smaller pan, because I need this pan to boil my rice. And I'm also now going to stir in some chopped chilies. You can use green if you want, but I'm really loving these red ones lately. Give these a quick stir in, and they can just melt their way into the masala. And then while we leave that cooking, we are going to boil the rice. So into my large pan now, I have some boiling water. I'm just going to add a little bit more. And then into this, we are going to add our rice. I have pre-soaked my rice. I always pre-soak my rice. I know lots of people don't like to, but I find that you just can't get rice wrong if you soak it first. You will find your grains cook much more evenly if you let them soak before you cook them. If you add them in without soaking, you might find that they tend to go a little bit mushy, which can be a bit problematic, especially when you're making a biryani. And always make sure you use a good quality basmati rice. I've got an extra long grain here, and it's my favourite rice. You just can't get this one wrong. And then I'm also going to add in a few wedges of lemon. This will help the rice stay nice and white, and a good teaspoon of salt just to season the rice. Now you'll see that it has actually absorbed a lot of water already. This stage only takes about 5 to 6 minutes. You only want the rice to half cook, you don't want it fully cooked. And I probably could have done with a bigger pan really. Ordinarily, I would tell you not to stir the rice. Ideally, you will have a much bigger pan and you won't need to touch the rice, but I'm having to because there's just so much rice. But this particular brand of rice is really good. It's really robust. It tends not to break anyway. Okay, mine is now half cooked, so I'm going to drain all of that water out of there and then I'll show you how to layer the biryani next. So I'm using the same pan that I boiled the rice in. I'm going to just melt some butter at the bottom and a little bit up the sides. And now we're going to layer. We are going to start with our drained rice. We're going to use half at the bottom. And you can see how lovely and long the grains are too. And I've already turned the heat off underneath the meat that was left cooking, but it is still nice and hot. So we can now spoon that on too. Again, we're going to use half of this. So the little bit of moisture that's left in the lamb will now help to cook the rice. So just make sure you get an equal amount of the meat and the masala on this layer. I'm just going to take a little bit of the oil from the bottom of the pan and drizzle that over the top. And now we're ready for the next layer of rice. And then finally, the last layer, which is your masala. And then finally, the last little bit of oil that's left in the pan. Now we're going to leave this on a really low heat for about 15 minutes. You're going to pop the lid on and leave it alone. Don't touch it, don't lift the lid, don't peek, just leave it be. All of that steam that's generated from the rice and from the masala will then help finish cooking the rice off. And when it's done, your grains will be perfectly done and all of the masala will have dripped into the rice too. Then once your rice has had a good 15 or even 20 minutes to just steam on its own, it should be ready. Now this is the first time I'm going to peek in and have a look too, so let's pray it's done. Now if you have trypophobia, the rice is actually standing on end around the edges, so don't look too closely. And to check if it's done, it's always best to move the rice away from the edge of the pan and check from a little bit further down. And then just squeeze it gently between your fingers and it should just squish down really easily. This is actually perfectly done. So all we're going to do now is dish it up. Now if you've seen any other recipes, you may have noticed that they sometimes sprinkle in fried onions into their biryani or use mint and coriander even. I like to keep things simple in my biryani. I don't think it's necessary to add any of that stuff. I really like it as it is. Simple flavours and less fuss. You'll also see that the grains of rice have coloured ever so slightly with the masala and the oils that we sprinkled in earlier. So there's no need even for saffron or colouring. We can just rely on the colour of the masala. You might find that the rice has stuck to the bottom of the pan as well. Don't worry about that, that does tend to happen when you cook or when you steam on the hob. As long as you arm yourself with a really good quality basmati rice, you can't get this wrong. Because the rice I'm using is such good quality, even though I didn't have enough water in my pan or enough space, the grains still held their shape. Let me know if you give my biryani recipe a try. I'd love to know in the comments. Go on, what are you waiting for? Make me proud.